I finally have all the equipment that I need to really start a YouTube channel. I should focus on disability in film and media. That would be a great idea. Oh, okay, well, it looks like SAG is about to go on strike soon. Thank God I'm not SAG, so that probably won't affect me much. Okay, so it looks like SAG doesn't want anyone who hopes to be in SAG eventually to talk about film and media from struck companies in any capacity, and doing so will be considered scabbing. Well, that totally doesn't shark me over at all. Thanks, AMPTP. I guess I can make a lot of content about YouTube and maybe A24 projects. They're not a struck company. I can't keep making content about celebrity fuck-ups and ableisms. Please, for the love of God, end the strike, or at least give me a film from a non-struck company. Oh, hey, Christopher Titus is performing near me. It's seriously been so long since I've come up with a new video idea that my script editor asked if she'd been fired. Listen, being an influencer is kind of difficult right now with the SAG strikes. We have to be really careful about what we say so that we don't undermine the actors who are striking because they're fighting for the safety of those of us who eventually want to join the union. I definitely appreciate the work that the strikers are doing, and I can't imagine how much harder it is for them, which is why I was so happy to see that Christopher Titus, a stand-up comedian, made a film that is both relevant to my niche and is something I'm allowed to talk about during the strikes. Hello, it's Ricky from the future. Well, technically the past, but it's the video's future, but it's also my present, and this is really confusing. Small editor's note, in the week between filming this and editing it and posting it, the actors' strike actually ended, which is great news for actors like myself, but it happened to coincide with me going on vacation and my editor having a really big workload, so we weren't able to refilm the whole thing. So yeah. Just let you know, the strike is over, so we're going to be going back to regularly scheduled content soon. I already have some plans, don't worry. But back to the future. Past, present, future, past. Back to the video. Who is Christopher Titus, you ask? Christopher Titus is a fairly successful stand-up comedian known for specials such as Norman Rockwell is Bleeding, Born with a Defect, and my personal favorite, Voice in My Head. He's known for being a no-holds-barred, I think that's the phrase. Hopefully my editor will fix that if it's not, and not just leave it in the script to make me look like an idiot. You didn't, did you? For whom almost no jokes are off limits. And when I say no jokes, I mean no jokes. Literally, just before writing this script, I had the pleasure of actually seeing him perform live, and in said live performance, he made jokes about his abusive childhood, his mother having unalived her third husband, and his experience being the victim of domestic violence and legal abuse. The last of which sounds like something that is completely impossible to joke about without it seeming like callous and unfeeling. But I shark you not, he actually found a delicate way to make that joke without making light of abuse. Side note, I approached him after the show and told him that I've been watching his content since high school, and he responded, "Wow, I'm so sorry. That means you had a bad childhood."
Yes, sir. It's why I started drinking.
Low blow, Chris. Accurate, but low blow. For Christopher Titus, no subject is too taboo to make a joke about, and usually that's the biggest sign that someone is an asshole. And while he is a self-proclaimed asshole, I don't know that that's true. Having seen some of the things he says outside of his comedy, he seems to be a person who has, as he says, a lot of monsters from his past, and instead of getting therapy, he prefers to make jokes in front of drunken strangers in order to process a life filled with pain. Anyone who is raised by alcoholic parents with untreated mental illness is bound to have a life filled with pain. But my question is this. If his comedy has no limits, is it okay for him to make jokes about other people's pain or other people's life experiences? In 2017, Christopher Titus wrote, directed, and produced a film called Special Unit, which told the story of police officer Garrett Fowler, a notoriously terrible cop, as he led the LAPD's first ever unit with disabled police officers, a unit known as Special Unit. The film is a raunchy and intentionally offensive comedy.
Listen, we're about to enter one of the most dangerous places in America. Anything can happen here, and to go in unarmed would be suicide. You guys got your game faces on?
Heck yeah!
Let's do this.
and since it's independently produced and not from a struck company, that means I'm allowed to talk about it. So there. Put your pitchforks down, SAG. I'm following the rules. According to Titus himself, the idea for the film began as a pilot for a comedic series which would have absolutely suited Christopher's talents given the wild success of his previous show, Titus, which ran from 2000 to 2002. 2 seasons doesn't often sound like a wild success, but as we've seen with Netflix in the last 2 years, sometimes good shows are canceled way too soon, especially when you talk shit to the studio head and manage to piss off the people in charge. Good job on that one, Chris. The idea behind the special unit film was apparently a promise made to Titus's longtime stand-up comedian friend and motivational speaker, Michael Aronin, who has since made a career for himself discussing his life with cerebral palsy. The promise was for Titus to make a TV show, or film in this case, surrounding ableism faced by disabled people within the workforce. Michael Aronin stars in the film along with several other actually disabled performers as police cadets attempting to join the Los Angeles Police Department. They've all passed their physical and psychological exams that are required to join the police force, but they're still being denied positions due to their disabilities. Enter Officer Garrett Fowler, who is being punished by the chief of police for shooting his last partner in the leg, and being punished by the mayor of Van Nuys for the way their romantic relationship ended.
I replaced you with batteries.
Ouch.
Go away.
Garrett Fowler is, according to Titus, Nick Nolte if Nick Nolte's asshole meter was turned up about 30 decibels. So when he's assigned to be the head of what the department is calling Special Unit, a specific squad of disabled officers, Garrett is naturally extremely ableist. No, but seriously, I thought Rain Man was filled to the brim with the R slur, but Special Unit uses the R slur as the first line of dialogue in the film and doesn't stop using it for the next hour and a half.
Terry, you gave me
Shark!
They like the term disabled.
The film continues to satirize the ways in which disabled people are often treated in the workforce. They're constantly called heroes just for existing, but then when they actually do something heroic, they're propped up in public, while in private they're still believed to be incapable. They're treated as a joke to their coworkers, and as much as their bosses step up to defend them, it's clear that in private their bosses share the same ableist sentiments as the employees they chastise. The most important part of the film, though, is that they satirize all of this while casting entirely disabled actors. Well, almost entirely, but more on that later. Christopher Titus, due to his friendship with Michael Aronin, has a history of telling jokes about Aronin in ways that I would say don't put down a disabled person and manage to highlight and joke about the forms of ableism that disabled people face in day-to-day living. One of my all-time favorite jokes by Titus is him telling a story of a time when Aronin continued to play into being infantilized by a waitress after she was ableist towards him, purely just to mess with her head. These are things that I imagine Aronin approves of Titus joking about, given their long and very well-documented friendship. But this brings me back to my earlier question. Is it really his place as a non-disabled person to make jokes about an experience that he himself has never had? Well, let's get into it. First things first, as always, let's lay some groundwork. There is a lot of usage of the R slur in Special Unit, which will be censored out because it's traumatizing for many members of the disabled community, and also to please the algorithm gods. I should disclose as well that I have had now 2 conversations with Christopher Titus, and since I don't know how parasocial relationships work, that obviously means he's my best friend. Thanks for being my best friend, Chris. I'm just kidding. Or am I? But in all seriousness, as I mentioned before, Christopher Titus has been one of my favorite stand-up comedians since I was in high school. I'm not joking when I say that his stand-up has gotten me through some of the absolute worst times of my life, so that does give me a potential bias that I wanted to disclose before discussing this film. I'm going to be critical of the negative impacts of the film, of which there are a few, but I'm also going to try and be fair, as is always my goal on this channel. And one last thing before we get into it. Are you subscribed to the channel? Because apparently 60% of the people who watch me are not subscribed. Jessica, I see you watching. Subscribe, damn it, Jessica! With all of that said, let's get into my complicated feelings about Special Unit. Look, let me be the first person to say that even though I myself am autistic, that doesn't necessarily mean that I have the R slur pass. Has the R slur been used to ridicule me my whole life? Yes, absolutely. In fact, when I mentioned people who have trauma surrounding that word, I was including myself. However, that doesn't mean that I can say the R slur, because while I have trauma associated with that word, it doesn't come with the same level of societal oppression for me as it has for others, as I am not disabled in the cognitive sense of someone who has an intellectual disability. When people call me the R slur, they may hurt my feelings. When someone uses the R slur to refer to someone with an intellectual disability, they're usually doing it in a way that takes away the human rights of that disabled person. So the question is this film justified in its usage of the R slur? While I don't speak for all of the disabled population, I'm personally on the side of leaning towards no. But again, as a person who hasn't experienced systemic oppression as a result of said slur, I don't really have a say in whether or not someone can say that word. Now, to be fair, the usage of the slur is intentional and contextual to show the level of ableism faced by disabled people in the workforce. You're not supposed to like the people using the slur. You're supposed to understand how horrible they are.
I might be a
Sure.
but you, sir, are an asshole.
The film takes covert ableism that disabled people face and makes it overt, and it makes the overt ableism even worse. However, I don't know that using the R slur was entirely necessary. At the very least, they could have toned down its usage. It's one thing to use the slur to emphasize the ableism of a character within a certain context, but I don't think all the slurs in the film were used in that way. I think many of them were thrown in there purely for shock purposes, and I personally don't think that's a good enough reason.
So you're telling me the word
Sure.
is offensive to you?
Only if used as an insult, like, I think the way you talk on the radio is,
Sure.
the way you think of disabled people is,
Sure.
so hence, you would be a
Sure. Alvin is a member of Special Unit, and as the only autistic character in the film, he dips into a lot of autism stereotypes, of which I'm just not a fan. To be fair, the film doesn't state that he's autistic, but to be fairer, Christopher Titus himself has confirmed in interviews that Alvin is in fact autistic. Alvin has a photographic memory and, according to the film, knows literally everything because he spent his childhood memorizing encyclopedias. This is a play on a long-held belief that all autistic people are savants with genius-level IQs. And while many people who are uneducated or inexperienced regarding to autistic people may think that this is a positive stereotype, it actually leads to a lot of harm for autistic people. Not only does it stop those of us with average intelligence, or bimbo-level intelligence in my case, from being properly diagnosed, but it also alienates the 1/3 of our community that has a comorbid cognitive impairment or intellectual disability. As if that wasn't enough, Alvin also has a weird quirk where after fighting with someone, he instantly wants to take a dump on them, which is just... Listen, aside from being incredibly ableist, it's just not a funny joke. It's kind of a low-hanging fruit. It's a weird connection that gets made in the minds of non-disabled people when it comes to the autistic community, and that weird connection is between autistic people and feces, which is just, as I said, weird. We don't play with feces. We don't just randomly shit everywhere. It's a weird thing to have in your film, and the only way to have made a non-ableist version of that joke would have been turning the ableist stereotype on its head instead of playing into it. It certainly doesn't help that the way Alvin speaks completely changes whenever this happens. Most of the time, he's perfectly capable of having a conversation just like anyone else. Then this happens and suddenly it's like, and now I make a poop on them. It's just odd.
Now I'm going to poop on him.
Alvin!
I think Christopher Titus's comedic writing is and can be far better than that. And the voice that the actor playing Alvin gives the character does not make any of the aforementioned easier to digest, which brings me to my next point. Out of the 4 members of Special Unit, 3 are played by actually disabled actors. Alvin is the only one portrayed by a non-disabled and non-autistic actor, Dave Figlioli.
This is bullshit!
Now, here's usually the part where people jump down my throat and say, "How do you know they're not autistic? They could just be private about it." Well, this time I have confirmation from the director of the film himself. Christopher Titus stated in an interview with Danielle Solzman that Dave Figlioli is not autistic and that the casting was purposeful because, according to Titus, Dave Figlioli played Alvin because the role had long speeches and in auditions really rattled people with autism. I didn't want to put someone through trauma. As an autistic actor who has made a lot of long speeches during my time as a performer, I have to push back on that. There are plenty of autistic actors who have played a myriad of complicated characters. Sir Anthony Hopkins, one of the most famous autistic actors around, won an Oscar for his performance in Silence of the Lambs, which had several long monologues and speeches for his character. And before I get another comment about how Titus may not have been able to find any autistic actors who could also do stunts, okay, one, along with being an autistic actor, I am also an autistic stunt woman. We do exist, but perhaps that's a little niche to find, which would be a suitable enough explanation if there wasn't an autistic performer in the film playing a non-autistic character. It's especially sad that there's a non-autistic actor playing an autistic character because Christopher Titus understands the importance of inclusive casting. From that same interview with Danielle Solzman, Titus had this to say on inclusive casting. Nothing is more full of shit than someone not disabled playing disabled. It's offensive. And he's right, it's offensive, which is why it's just a little hypocritical of him to then turn around and cast a non-autistic actor to play an autistic character, especially when one of the film's main discussions has to do with the way that disabled people are often underestimated and infantilized. When you know better, you're supposed to do better, and Titus has proven that he does in fact know better.
This is bullshit!
Now, with all that said, there were genuinely a lot of parts in the film that I liked, but before we get into those, let's take a quick meme break and have a word from our sponsor. All of these memes were brought to you by our Patreon. So if you want to share your favorite memes and have them be shared on the channel to make me laugh and be read out loud, please be sure to check out our Patreon. He doesn't look autistic. My apologies, Luke. Would you mind doing an autism for the lady, please? To everyone's horror, Luke then proceeded to name every train ever built. This is funny because I'm literally running late to go on a train right now. So that's hilarious. When I was 10 or so, I was deathly afraid of vampires, so I stole the garlic powder from my mom's spice cabinet and kept it in my coat pocket, and if I was out at night with my parents and thought someone was acting real sus, I'd try to surreptitiously sprinkle garlic powder on them. Like, imagine a weird little girl deciding you failed her vibe check and promptly seasoning you. Oh my god, I love that. Talking to someone with the same interests as you and realizing that they're a casual enjoyer while you're deranged. That's me with Star Wars, honestly. That is me. You can't see it, but all of these are Star Wars books. They're Shakespearean Star Wars books. I am a little deranged. One time a casual hockey fan tried to convey this experience to me from the other side as like, it's like, okay, imagine that you like donuts and you meet a guy who also likes donuts and you're like, hey, cool, we both like donuts, but this guy, he built his house out of donuts. I feel called out with the shark wall. Hey, this is a word from our sponsor, and our sponsor is Patreon. Well, not Patreon, the whole channel, but, you know, our Patreon. If you want to interact, see my first viewing, and see early script access and early video access, go ahead and click over to the link in our Patreon. We also do a Patreon shout out every single video. So if you want to be shouted out, go ahead and sign up for the Patreon. Please sign up. My cat needs to be fed. I mean, she already has food, but she always acts like she's starving anyways. We look forward to interacting with you over on patreon.com/RiveraBonBon. And back to the video. There's a lot of movies about disability or the disabled experience that fall under the category of inspiration porn. This is where a film focuses on the tragedy of disability in order to make the audience feel better about the main character, who is the disabled person's caretaker, or even just to make the audience feel better about themselves. I can't tell you how many times I've heard the phrase, disabled people were placed on this earth to make us grateful for the things we have. What makes a lot of these inspiration porn movies worse is that for the most of them, the disabled characters aren't fleshed out people. You could easily replace them with a misbehaving dog and the films would still make sense, because Hollywood hasn't historically seen disabled people as people. We're just props. Special Unit is not like that at all. The disabled characters do have fleshed out personalities.
I am a little person with a gun.
She's right.
You like them sometimes and you hate them sometimes. One of the running jokes in the movie is that Mac, played by Tobias Forrest, is kind of a douche that the rest of the squad sort of tolerates. He's not a douche because he's disabled, he's a douche because he believes in conspiracy theories and lies all the time to brag about himself. He's basically half of all able-bodied cis white men.
The underground bunkers are placed around the country. Denver Airport, under Tesla Motors factory, and Giants Stadium. Did they embed the chip in your arm yet? I cut mine out. Yeah. Wait.
That's both legitimately funny and doesn't make a joke about disability. Not only is the film inherently the opposite of inspiration porn, but they actually frequently mock it, and the disabled characters get multiple opportunities to talk about how it's harmful to the disabled experience. That's a harsh but correct look at the world that we rarely get to see in film and television, and it's genuinely nice to see it here. At its core, ableism is what the entire film is about, but it doesn't do ableism in the Hollywood way where there's an able-bodied savior who sees the disabled person for who they are when no one else can. No, in fact, Garrett Fowler chooses to be overt with his ableism instead of covert, and the film does not reward him for that, nor does it reward anyone else in the film for it. Garrett does learn how frustrating it is for the disabled cops to be constantly seen as incapable, and he calls it out. He's never nice, but he becomes less ableist. Special Unit is honest about ableism in a way that a lot of films aren't, and that in and of itself is kind of refreshing. It would be so much easier to exist in society if people were actually open about their ableism, since disabled people wouldn't end up being betrayed by people who they think are safe. Special Unit not only tackles the topic of ableism, but it does it in a way that, while exaggerated, feels real, and that is, again, refreshing. Two of the disabled characters are interested in each other in a sexual way. It's not played for laughs, they just like each other and they get together. In a world where the infantilization of disabled people would often be played up when sexual relationships get involved, the relationship between the two disabled characters in Special Unit is legitimately handled well. A very well-known film often listed in the top funniest films in history is Mel Brooks's Blazing Saddles.
Let me get this straight. You guys think
Shark
is the same as the N-word?
Actually, if you've read your history, you would know that the U.S. has never enslaved disabled people.
And they never whipped them at the Special Olympics.
But it would have made the competition a lot more fierce, am I right? Huh?
You mother...
While Blazing Saddles is, for many, a very funny movie, the question that rings in my head is it an appropriate film for Mel Brooks, a white man, to have made, given that the film is about the black experience with slavery and discrimination? Given that I'm not a member of the black community, it's not my call to make, and I won't make it here. But Special Unit gives me similar vibes in the sense that even though it's a funny movie, even though there were parts that did seem to understand some of the disability experience, I'm not sure it was entirely Christopher Titus's place to make the film, considering that he has historically separated himself from the disability community and is not disabled himself.
This is bullshit!
Personally, I don't think it was Titus's place to do this without a writing crew composed primarily of disabled people. But given that this is a complicated subject, and I am only one member of the disability community, I want to ask you all what you think. What are your opinions on other people making jokes about the disability community? Let me know in the comments down below.
Thank you for clearing that up.
Also down below, you can let me know what other content, preferably not SAG-struck content, that you would like me to review or discuss. Until then, I will see you in the next video. Welcome to our Patreon shout out. Today's patron that we are shouting out is Trevor Jensen. Jensen? I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Trevor. I'm so sorry. Trevor is new to our community, but we have had several conversations and I have loved having you a part of our Patreon community. I am so glad you're here and I look forward to many different conversations with you in the future. If you'd like to join the Patreon and get yourself a Patreon shout out, the link is in the description below so that you can check out our Patreon and, help me feed my cat. She's already been fed, but she's demanding more. Until then, I will see you all in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.